I think what we've seen is that the negotiations have come up to a really reasonably good start, that the mood is good, that people are actually interested in moving forward on the non-papers, as they're called, which are the papers that have been in discussion in the negotiations since June. And I think we have a reasonably good chance of movement on a number of the key issues. The big things will be left until next week, but some of the more easy issues, like what is the exact definition of reducing emissions from deforestation? What do we mean by forest? How do we make sure that indigenous peoples get a role in this context? Those things and adaptation and technology, I think they can move forward this week, and it looks good. What we saw yesterday was a leak of a text that the Danish presidency has produced as their idea of how the final outcome of this meeting could look. What turned up, and it's been in the rumors for quite a long time, was that this Danish text reflects a desire to make sure that the US will get on board with the final agreement. And it did not in the same way reflect the needs and the interests of developing countries.
The Danish text was a text which was not an inclusive text. Most developing countries were not consulted.
What this means is that we now have it. We know what's in it. This will not, I think, disturb the negotiations anymore. The big fights have already been there. They were there last week in a meeting here in Copenhagen. So what I expect will happen now is that this text get put away on a shelf. We know what's in it. And now the negotiations will be allowed to continue.
The first trick is that countries will say that we are putting a number on the table. But when you begin to unpack that number, you will find that most of that money is supposed to flow through offsets. Okay? So this leads to what we call double counting. The second sort of loophole is one on additionality, as we call it. There is some development finance flow that happens. What the developed countries are trying to do is, while they're giving a scale of money and putting it on the table, they are actually recycling and repackaging their existing relief and development aid. And this is not new money for climate aid.
We're hoping that what the U.S., what President Obama will bring next week is a commitment to make passing the domestic legislation in the Senate his top priority after the health care debate is done early next year. That he will also come prepared to put on the table a meaningful U.S. contribution to the short-term financing package that's being assembled, and that he would be willing to commit the U.S. in qualitative terms to do our fair share of coming up with the long-term financing needed to help developing countries reduce their emissions and to help the vulnerable countries adapt to the impacts of climate change that we're already experiencing. These are all things he can do. We're hoping he can do it next week, and that he'll provide some momentum and energy to this process by making those announcements. We also hope that he will say something about the fact that there are provisions in the U.S. domestic bill that would take some of the allowances under our cap and trade system and use them to help countries like Brazil, Indonesia, Papua New Guinea, and the Congo reduce their emissions from deforestation. The analysis we've done of those provisions shows that that money could create reductions in those countries in emissions of carbon dioxide equal to 10% of total U.S. emissions.